Chapter 1. The Scent of Silver and Fear. The forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth and decaying leaves, a scent so familiar it felt like a second skin. Nyra moved through the dappled gloom with a practiced silence, her worn leather boots making no sound. Her focus was absolute. A tiny, 5-petaled flower, glowing with a soft, lunar luminescence. Moonpetal. Her fingers, stained with chlorophyll and dirt, brushed against the delicate blossom. Gentle now. She eased the plant from the soil, root and all, a quiet sigh of relief escaping her lips. This was the last of it. This little bit of light was her mother's only hope. This particular act of survival was a dance she knew well. It was a rhythm of caution and desperation that had governed her entire life. After carefully stowing the herb in her satchel, she navigated toward the edge of the woods. Just beyond the tree line, a small, temporary camp of rogues huddled around a sputtering fire. They were lean, wary men and women, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows. Outsiders, just like her. A man with a scar splitting his eyebrow looked up as she approached, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife. "You have it?" His voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together. Nyra nodded, not trusting her voice. She pulled the pouch of moonpetal from her bag. His eyes widened slightly. 3 blossoms, all healthy. He whistled softly, a sound of grudging respect. He tossed a small, heavy purse onto the dirt between them. The clink of silver, the most beautiful sound in the world. It was medicine. It was another week of life for her mother. It was everything. Following that transaction, she felt a fleeting sense of victory. "The Bloodfang pack has been on edge," another rogue, a wiry woman, muttered to her companion, her words a clear warning for Nyra. "They're Alpha, Draven. They say he's more beast than man, merciless." The name fell into the air and seemed to suck the warmth from it. Nyra's blood went cold. Her mother's warnings, whispered in the dead of night for years, echoed in her mind. Never trust an Alpha, they are predators. They take and they break and they discard. She offered a curt nod, eager to be gone, the silver feeling like a hot coal in her palm. Having secured what she needed, Nyra turned back toward the deeper woods, planning a wide, circuitous route home. But as she passed a massive, ancient oak she'd used as a landmark earlier, something caught her eye. A mark, carved brutally into the bark. She'd somehow missed it before. 3 long, deep gashes, stained a dark, angry red that could only be dried blood. A pack marker, the symbol of the Bloodfang, a jolt of fear, pure, undiluted. It shot through her, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. She wasn't near his territory. She was standing right in the heart of it. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Den. The dream ended as it always did, with a scent. It wasn't a simple smell of pine or rain or woman. It was something more. The scent of night-blooming flowers and ozone after a lightning strike, of buried power and a wild, untamed spirit that called to the very core of his wolf. Draven woke with a snarl ripping from his throat. The sheets tangled. The scent lingered for a heart-stopping moment, intoxicating and maddeningly out of reach, before vanishing, leaving only the cold, sterile air of his den. His wolf paced the cage of his ribs, restive, angry. This frustration was a familiar companion, a ghost he couldn't shake. He dressed quickly, his movements economical and devoid of thought, his face settling into a mask of cold indifference. His Alpha's den was more fortress than home, carved from dark, unforgiving stone. He found his beta, Lucian, waiting for him in the main chamber, along with the pack's healer, an old wolf named Alara. Lucien, his half-brother, flashed a charming smile that never reached his eyes. "Troubled sleep, brother?" Draven ignored him. His gaze fell on Alara. "Report." A flat command. "The poison is aggressive, Alpha," Alara said, her voice strained. "It attacks the blood. Young Kyle, he won't last the night. We have no cure." "Then we don't waste resources on a lost cause." Draven's tone was final. He felt a flicker of protest from Lucian, but ignored it. Sentimentality was a disease. It created weakness, and weakness got you killed. It was a lesson his mother's death had carved into his soul. This coldness, this brutal efficiency, was his shield against the Vaeric curse that haunted his bloodline. A curse that amplified loss until it became a soul-shredding agony. He would not feel that again. He would not lose anyone else. Because he would never let them get that close. Building on that resolution, he dismissed Kale's fate from his mind. The rival pack that did this will pay. Double the border patrols. The healer, however, hesitated. Alpha. There is one thing. An old legend. A flower, they call it Moonpetal, that is said to purify cursed blood. It's incredibly rare. The stories say it grows only in the deepest, most secluded parts of the northern woods. She spoke the words with the air of a final, hopeless prayer. The northern woods, the same area where his patrols had reported rogue activity. Draven's focus sharpened, the scent from his dream momentarily forgotten, replaced by the cold calculus of command. A potential cure was a resource, a weapon. It had to be secured. He turned to Lucian, his eyes hard as flint. Take a patrol, sweep the entire northern forest, find this flower, and bring me anyone you find trespassing.
Chapter 3. Caught in the Bloodfang jaws, panic. A wild animal clawing at her throat. The forest, her sanctuary, had transformed into a labyrinth of terror. Every rustle of leaves was a footstep. Every shadow, a predator. She ran. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The silver for her mother's medicine felt impossibly heavy in her satchel, a tragic reminder of what she stood to lose. Get away. Just get away. A twig snapped behind her, loud, deliberate. They were close, so close. From this point of realization, a new instinct took over. She darted off her path, using her intimate knowledge of the terrain, scrambling over moss-slicked rocks, ducking under the low-hanging branches of ancient pines. Her movements were desperate but nimble. She could hear them now, not just as sounds, but as a presence, a coordinated, hunting presence. Low growls vibrated through the ground, a chilling language of pursuit. They weren't just chasing. They were hurting her. Despite her efforts, she found herself funneled into a small, enclosed clearing. A dead end. 3 massive wolves emerged from the trees, blocking her only escape. They weren't beasts of mindless fury. Their golden eyes were sharp with a terrifying intelligence. They shifted before her, the crack of bone and stretching of sinew a horrifying sound that would haunt her nightmares. 3 tall, powerfully built warriors now stood where the wolves had been. Her heart seized. This confrontation was the brutal culmination of all her fears. Trespasser, the leader growled, his voice a low threat. Nyra backed away, her hand instinctively reaching for the small skinning knife at her belt. A pathetic defense, a kitten's claw against a tiger, but she would not be taken easily. She lunged, not with any real hope of winning, but with the defiant fury of a cornered animal. It was over in a second. One of them caught her wrist in an iron grip, twisting the knife from her hand. Another grabbed her from behind, lifting her off her feet with humiliating ease. With her struggle rendered futile, a crushing sense of defeat washed over her. They bound her hands tightly behind her back and tied a rough strip of cloth over her eyes, plunging her into a world of darkness and terrifying sounds. The last thing she sensed was the feel of being half dragged, half carried through the woods, the familiar scent of damp earth and pine, fading, replaced by the foreign, musky, and overwhelmingly dominant scent of the Bloodfang pack. She was being taken to the Alpha, into the monster's den.
Chapter 4. The Scent of Fate. The heavy doors groaned open, a sound like a tomb being unsealed. 2 of the warriors shoved Nyra forward, and she stumbled, catching herself on the cold stone floor. The blindfold was ripped away. Light, dim and flickering from torches set in iron sconces, flooded her vision. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to a scene from her worst nightmares. She was in a vast hall, a throne room carved from the mountain's heart. Banners bearing the bloody claw of the Bloodfang pack hung from the high vaulted ceiling like captured ghosts, and on a throne of polished obsidian and dark wood sat the Alpha, Draven. He was not what she expected. He was younger, for one. Not some grizzled old wolf, but a man in his prime, with a presence that sucked all the air from the room. His dark hair was unruly, his jaw sharp and unforgiving. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of liquid gold, ancient and intelligent and utterly without mercy. He looked down at her, not as a person, but as a thing. A problem to be disposed of. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in her belly. This was it. The end. Her mother's warnings were a frantic scream in her head. A rogue. His voice was a low, chilling rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Found with a satchel full of moonpetal in the northern woods. Explain yourself. She lifted her chin, a pathetic spark of defiance in the face of overwhelming power. I was gathering herbs. He gave a slight, dismissive smile that held no humor. The northern woods are Bloodfang territory. The penalty for trespassing is death. The penalty for poaching our resources. He let the sentence hang in the air, a silken, deadly threat. Is also death. You have sealed your own fate. He raised a hand, a silent command to the warriors beside her. This was it. She squeezed her eyes shut, a single desperate thought of her mother flashing through her mind. I'm sorry. The guard stepped forward.
As his warriors moved to execute the sentence, a faint scent reached him. It was subtle at first, masked by the fear rolling off the girl. But then it grew stronger. It was night-blooming flowers, and ozone after a lightning strike. It was the untamed wildness of a coming storm. It was her. The scent from the dream. His entire world tilted on its axis. His wolf, dormant and controlled moments before, rose up with a possessive, earth-shattering roar inside his mind. Mine. Everything stopped. The warriors froze, sensing the violent shift in their alpha. Draven's breath hitched. He stared at the girl, really stared at her for the first time. Beneath the dirt and the fear, he could see her, slender, but with a strength in the line of her jaw. Her brown hair was streaked with lighter strands, like honey spun with sunlight. And her scent, gods, her scent was wrapping around him, sinking into him, claiming him. He felt another presence too, a flicker of deep hidden power within her, something ancient and dormant. A shadow wolf. The legends were real? His mind was a war zone. His logic, the cold, hard shield he'd built for years, screamed at him. Kill her. She's a rogue, a complication, a weakness. But his wolf, the primal, instinctual core of him, would not allow it. It would tear him apart from the inside out before it let anyone harm her. She was the one he'd been dreaming of, the one whose absence had left a hollow ache in his soul he never understood until this very moment. He couldn't kill her, but he couldn't let her go either. He lowered his hand, the motion stiff, unnatural. The air in the hall was thick with confusion. Wait. The word was sandpaper rough. He pushed himself to his feet. The urge to go to her, to touch her, to wrap himself in her scent, was a physical agony. He fought it down. He needed control. Take her to the guest quarters, he commanded, his voice tight. She will be questioned. Later. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. Lucian shot him a look of pure disbelief from the side of the room, but Draven ignored it. He watched as his guards, their faces a mask of confusion, pulled the girl to her feet. Her eyes, wide and terrified, met his for a fraction of a second. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw a flicker of something else. A wild, defiant spirit that his wolf sang for. He had to have her. He had to know her. And he would let no one, not his pack, not his brother, not even himself, stand in the way.
Nyra's mind reeled. Guest quarters? Not a dungeon? Not a shallow grave in the woods? The warriors dragged her from the throne room, their confusion a palpable thing. They led her down a different corridor, one lined with woven tapestries and warm torchlight. They stopped before a heavy carved wooden door and pushed her inside, untying her hands before shutting it behind her with a heavy, final thud. A lock clicked into place. She stumbled into the center of the room, her heart pounding a frantic, uneven rhythm. It wasn't a cell. It was a bedroom, lavish and opulent. A huge bed with furs and silks, a fireplace with a low, crackling fire, a table laden with a pitcher of water and a bowl of fruit. It was more luxury than she had seen in her entire life. And it was terrifying. She wasn't a prisoner to be interrogated. She was a prize, a curiosity. She rushed to the large, unshuttered window and pushed. It didn't budge, locked from the outside. Her breath hitched. This wasn't a guest room. It was a gilded cage. Chapter 5. A Brother's Promise. An hour passed. Or maybe it was a day. Time had lost its meaning in this opulent cage. Nyra had paced every inch of the room, her bare feet silent on the plush, deep red rug. She touched the silken sheets on the bed, the cold, smooth stone of the fireplace mantel. It all felt unreal, like a dream teetering on the edge of a nightmare. This was a room for a treasured guest, not a rogue trespasser sentenced to death. The disconnect was a buzzing anxiety under her skin. Why was she here? What did that terrifying Alpha want from her? She was a thing to be displayed, a strange, wild bird he had captured and put on a pretty perch. The thought made her skin crawl. The heavy door creaked open and Nyra spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. But it wasn't Draven. It was the other one from the throne room. The one with the charming smile and the intelligent eyes. The one who had looked at his Alpha with disbelief. His scent was different, still a wolf, still powerful, but it was like a calm forest breeze compared to Draven's raging storm. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm Lucian," he said, his voice smooth and calming. "Draven's brother. I promise, I'm not going to hurt you." Nyra didn't relax. "What do you want?" "To talk," he said, taking a step closer. He stopped when she flinched back. "And maybe to help. My brother, he's not himself right now. He's never done anything like this before. To spare a rogue? To give them the royal guest quarters? It's unheard of." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "He recognized you, didn't he? Your scent. The Fates have a cruel sense of humor, it seems." Nyra's mind was racing. Fates? Recognized her? What did he mean? "I don't know what you're talking about." Lucian's smile was tinged with something that looked like sadness. "Don't you? I think you do, but that's not why I'm here." He took another slow step forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I came to tell you that you're not alone. I made a promise a long time ago to a woman with eyes just like yours, a healer. Her name was Alara." Nyra froze. That was her mother's name. How could he possibly know her mother? Was this some kind of trick? "My mother," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Yes," Lucian confirmed, his gaze intense. "I promised her that if I ever came across her daughter, I would look after her, that I would protect her bloodline." He let that bombshell hang in the air between them. A promise to her mother, protect her bloodline? This was impossible. This man was the brother of the monster who had just sentenced her to death. Her mother's greatest rule was to never, ever trust an Alpha. But Lucian? Lucian was offering her a lifeline. He was offering her answers. "My brother is possessive," Lucian continued, his voice laced with a subtle challenge. "He's powerful, but his power has made him a prisoner of his own past. He sees you as a thing to be owned, a cure for his own loneliness. He'll keep you here forever if he can. But I can get you out. I can help you escape." He looked at her, his expression sincere, offering a choice she never thought she'd have. A choice between the devil she'd just met and an angel who looked just like him. Who could she trust? Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. An alpha offering to help her escape from another alpha? It went against everything she had ever been taught. Just as she was about to speak, the door to the room slammed open with a deafening crash. Draven stood there, his golden eyes blazing with a fire that was hotter and more terrifying than anything she had ever seen. He wasn't looking at her. His furious, predatory gaze was locked on his brother. A low, rumbling growl tore from his chest, and his scent, pure, undiluted possessiveness and rage, flooded the room, a physical wave of power that made the air thick and hard to breathe.
Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. The sight of Lucian in her room, standing too close, speaking to her with that familiar, smooth charm. It ignited a firestorm in Draven's soul. A primal rage, white-hot and absolute, consumed him. His wolf clawed at the surface, screaming one single silent word. Mine. He had left her for less than an hour, trying to wrestle his own sanity back from the brink, and his brother had immediately moved in. The betrayal was a sharp, physical blow. He stalked into the room, every line of his body radiating lethal intent. Get out. The words were not a request. They were jagged shards of ice, a command backed by the full weight of his alpha power. Lucian, to his credit, didn't flinch, but a flicker of something, caution, fear, crossed his face. He gave Nyra one last meaningful look before turning and walking past Draven without another word. The slam of the door as Draven kicked it shut echoed the violent turmoil inside him. Now they were alone. His furious golden gaze finally fell on her. She was backed against the far wall, her eyes wide with fear, but also with a spark of defiance that he found both infuriating and intoxicating. "What did he say to you?" Draven demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl as he advanced on her. "Nothing," she lied, her chin lifting. "He was just seeing if I needed anything. He is my beta. He does what I command," Draven snarled, closing the distance between them until he was towering over her. "And I did not command him to come here, so I will ask you again. What did he want?" He needed to know. The thought of Lucian whispering things to her, poisoning her against him, turning his fated mate away before he even had a chance to claim her, it was unbearable. His control, already stretched thin, was beginning to fray. She was terrified, but a stubborn anger burned through the fear. Who was he to demand anything of her? He had captured her, threatened to kill her, and now he was acting like a jealous lover. The hypocrisy was staggering. "Why do you care?" she shot back, her voice shaking but firm. "Am I your prisoner or your pet? You can't decide to kill me one minute and then act like you own me the next." Her words hit him like a physical blow. His eyes blazed, and in a flash of movement too fast to follow, he had her pinned. His hands slammed against the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. Her back was pressed against the cold, unyielding stone, and his body was a wall of heat and power in front of her. His scent was everywhere, a dizzying mix of pine, earth, and pure, masculine fury. It should have been terrifying, and it was. But beneath the terror, a strange, treacherous warmth pooled low in her belly. His face was inches from hers. She could see the battle raging in his golden eyes, the cold, ruthless alpha warring with the hot, possessive beast. His chest rose and fell with harsh, ragged breaths. She could feel the vibrations through the wall. He was losing control, and some wild, reckless part of her wanted to see what would happen when he did. "You have no idea what you've walked into," he breathed, his voice a guttural whisper. His gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heart-stopping second, she thought he was going to kiss her. The air between them crackled with an impossible tension, a mix of fear and a raw, undeniable desire that seemed to have a life of its own. He leaned in closer, his lips brushing against hers as he spoke, the touch a spark of lightning on her skin. "You should fear me," he growled, the words a promise and a warning all in one. But then, With a curse that was torn from the depths of his soul, he wrenched himself away from her. He stalked to the door, his entire body rigid with a control that was costing him everything. He slammed his fist against the wood, a crack echoing in the sudden silence. Without another look at her, he wrenched the door open and stormed out, leaving it swinging on its hinges. Nyra slid down the wall, her legs trembling too much to hold her. Her heart was a wild drum against her ribs. Her fingers rose to touch her lips where the ghost of his touch still burned. She was no longer just a prisoner trying to escape. She was trapped in a web of politics, promises, and a dangerous, consuming desire. There was no way out, not anymore.
Chapter 7. The Rules of the Den. After the explosive confrontation with Draven, a new, unnerving routine settled over Nyra's life. The Alpha avoided her, yet his presence was a constant, oppressive weight in the air. She was a ghost in his fortress, allowed to wander the main halls but always under the watchful eye of a silent warrior who was her shadow. Her goal was simple: learn the rules of this place. Because learning the rules was the first step to figuring out how to break them. The Great Hall was a cavern of stone and smoke, a place of brutal efficiency. Warriors were always training, their grunts and the thud of fists on leather pads a constant rhythm. The scent of sweat, steel, and roasting meat clung to everything. Following her initial fear, a different kind of observation took hold. The pack members watched her, their gazes a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and a grudging respect for the Alpha's decree. She was an anomaly, a rogue who had been spared. A stray taken into the heart of the den. She learned to keep her eyes down, to make herself small, to blend into the shadows. She watched Draven from afar as he led his warriors. There was a cold precision to his movements, a tactical brilliance in his commands that, while terrifying, was undeniably effective. He wasn't just a brute. He was a king, and this was his court. A court of fang and claw. A small, unwanted seed of respect began to sprout in the barren ground of her fear. It was during one of these observations that she felt a new pair of eyes on her, sharp and calculating. A she-wolf approached, moving with the fluid, predatory grace of a panther. She was stunning, tall and statuesque, with hair as black as a raven's wing and eyes the color of ice. Her scent was of winter frost and arrogance. This had to be Leandra, the she-wolf Lucian had warned her about. "So you're the Alpha's new pet," Leandra said, her voice a low, musical purr that didn't hide its sharp edges. She circled Nyra slowly, looking her up and down with open disdain. "A feral rogue. I can smell the wild on you. I must admit I don't see the appeal." Nyra remained silent, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. She remembered her mother's words, "Never let them see your fear. It's blood in the water to a shark." She simply met the she-wolf's gaze, her expression carefully neutral. Her silence seemed to infuriate Leandra more than any retort could have. The beautiful she-wolf's smile tightened, the condescension in her eyes hardening into something colder. Building on that silent challenge, Leandra leaned in close, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for Nyra. "Don't get too comfortable in your gilded cage. He will grow tired of you. He always does. And when he discards you, I will be the one to ensure you are thrown back into the wild where you belong." She straightened up, a perfect, charming smile returning to her face as if she'd just been exchanging pleasantries. "Stay away from the Alpha. He is mine." With that parting shot, Leandra turned and sauntered away, leaving Nyra standing alone, the threat hanging in the air like poison. She now understood that Draven wasn't the only danger in this den. She had an enemy. And this enemy was clever, beautiful, and wanted her gone. Or dead. Chapter 8. A Healer's Worth. The scent of blood and fevered infection drew Nyra toward the pack's infirmary 2 days later. It was a smell she knew too well. Inside the small, cave-like room, Alara, the old pack healer, was frantically working over a warrior who was stretched out on a cot, his leg mangled and glowing with an angry red heat. A dark, ugly line was snaking its way up his thigh from a deep gash in his calf. Silver poisoning, aggressive and fast-moving. She saw the poultice Alara was applying, a standard mix of comfrey and yarrow. It wasn't working. It couldn't work. The silver had to be drawn out first. Proceeding from that clinical observation, Nyra felt a familiar pull. This was her world. Not the politics of the Great Hall, not the fear of alphas, but the quiet, certain knowledge of root and leaf. She watched for another minute as Alara's face grew more desperate. The warrior groaned, his body convulsing in a wave of pain. Nyra couldn't just stand there. She stepped forward. "That won't work," she said, her voice quiet but clear. Alara looked up, her eyes tired and frustrated. "And what would a rogue know?" "I know that silver needs to be drawn out before the flesh can heal," Nyra countered, her confidence growing. She pointed to a shelf of supplies. "You need charcoal and clay and a touch of blood moss to fight the rot." Her words were certain, born from years of practice. Alara hesitated, her pride warring with the desperate reality of her dying patient. The warrior groaned again, a sound of pure agony. That decided it. "Show me," Alara commanded, stepping aside. In that moment, a sense of purpose washed over Nyra, eclipsing her fear. This, she could do. Her hands moved with practiced ease, grinding the charcoal into a fine powder, mixing it with the wet clay and herbs. The other healers in the room watched, their skepticism slowly turning to awe as she worked. She wasn't a rogue now. She was a healer. She applied the thick, dark poultice to the wound, her touch gentle but firm. She spoke in a low, calming voice to the delirious warrior, not of hope, but of the simple mechanics of what she was doing. Almost immediately, the angry red of the wound began to recede, the black line of the poison starting to fade. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. She had saved his life.
From the shadowed archway of the infirmary, Draven watched the entire scene unfold. He had been drawn by the commotion, expecting to find another failure, another loss. Instead, he found her. He saw the way she moved, the certainty in her hands, the quiet authority in her voice. This wasn't the terrified girl from the forest, or the defiant captive who spat angry words at him. This was someone else entirely. She was a force of nature in her own right, her power not in claw and fang, but in a deep, ancient knowledge that commanded respect. His wolf, which had been a constant, possessive roar in his mind whenever he thought of her, settled into a low, humming purr of pride. Our mate is strong. The thought was involuntary, and it shook him. He had seen her as a scent, a fated temptation, a dangerous weakness he had to control. But watching her now, seeing the life she held so capably in her hands, he realized he had been a fool. She wasn't a weakness. She was a power he didn't yet understand. Later that evening, he found her alone, carefully cleaning the healing tools. The air between them was thick with an unspoken tension. He didn't thank her. He didn't praise her. Words of softness were foreign to him. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest, and asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Where did you learn to do that?" She didn't look up from her work. "My mother taught me." "And who taught her?" he pressed, his voice a low rumble. She finally looked up, her eyes guarded, wary. Her mother before her. It's been passed down. He stared at her for a long moment, 1,000 questions warring inside him. Who was she? This strange rogue healer who carried the scent of his destiny and held the power of life and death in her hands. For the first time, his curiosity was not just about owning her, but about knowing her. And that subtle shift, that tiny crack in the armor around his heart, was the most terrifying thing of all.
Chapter 9. Under the Alpha's Protection. The main hall of the Bloodfang pack was a symphony of chaos. It was a pack gathering, a rare night of relaxation, but for Nyra, it felt like being a lamb in a lion's den. The air was thick with the smell of spilled ale, roasted meat, and the overwhelming scent of dozens of werewolves. The sound was a deafening roar of laughter, boasting, and challenges. She tried to make herself invisible, finding a small, shadowed corner where she could simply observe, but she could feel the eyes on her. Always the eyes. She was the Alpha's strange pet, and tonight, she was on display. Predictably, her attempt to hide failed. Leandra, looking like a goddess of the hunt in dark, fitted leathers, moved through the crowd and stopped before her. The nearby chatter died down as wolves turned to watch the unfolding drama. Leandra's smile was as sharp and beautiful as broken glass. "Still here, little rogue?" she purred, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "I'm surprised. Usually the Alpha's toys don't last this long. Tell me." She tilted her head, a gesture of mock curiosity. "Do you truly believe you have a place here? A feral stray in a den of purebloods? You weaken us. You are a stain on our pack." Nyra's stomach clenched, but she held Leandra's icy gaze, refusing to speak, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. The silence stretched, thick with tension. The entire pack was watching, waiting to see what would happen. They were waiting to see how the Alpha's pet would be put in her place.
From his throne, Draven watched the scene with a cold, rising fury. He had allowed Leandra her petty games, her subtle barbs. But this was different. This was a public challenge. Leandra wasn't just insulting Nyra. She was questioning his judgment, his strength, his authority as Alpha in front of the entire pack. And she was humiliating the one person his soul had recognized as his own. A dangerous line had been crossed. The beast inside him stirred, not with the hot rage she usually provoked, but with a cold, deadly purpose. He rose from his throne. A hush fell over the hall as he descended the stone steps, his movements silent and deliberate. He didn't look at Leandra. He didn't acknowledge anyone. His golden eyes were fixed only on Nyra. He saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide, and the proud defiance that refused to let her break. That strength called to him, a siren song in the chaos. He walked directly to her side and, in one smooth motion, curled his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his body. Her sharp gasp was lost in the collective shock of the pack. He finally turned his gaze to Leandra, and the temperature in the hall seemed to drop 20 degrees. His voice, when he spoke, was not a shout. It was a low, quiet sound that was more terrifying than any roar. "She is under my protection," he stated, each word a block of ice. He let his gaze sweep over the silent pack before returning to Leandra, his eyes glowing with a deadly promise. "Touch her, and you lose your hands." It wasn't a threat. It was a new law. Leandra's face went pale, her mask of confident superiority shattering. She had overplayed her hand and she knew it. Without another word, she turned and vanished into the crowd. Draven held Nyra for a moment longer, soaking in the feeling of her against him, her intoxicating scent a balm to his ragged soul. He had not just defended her, he had claimed her in front of them all. He had tied her fate to his, publicly and irrevocably. Later that night, the fragile truce between them shattered. In the privacy of her chambers, he now thought of them as their chambers. She turned on him, her eyes blazing with fury. "How dare you?" she hissed, shoving at his chest. "How dare you parade me around like some prize you've won? I am not a thing to be protected or claimed." "I did what was necessary to ensure your safety," he growled back, his hands coming up to grip her arms, his own control snapping under the force of her anger and his overwhelming need. "My safety?" she cried, her voice filled with disbelief. "You put a target on my back. You declared to your entire pack of predators that I am yours. You don't care about my safety. You only care about possession." Her words were a knife to his heart because they were half true. But the other half, the part he couldn't explain, the part that was screaming in his soul that she was his to protect, his to cherish, his to save, that part overwhelmed him. The argument, the anger, the unbearable tension that had been simmering between them for days finally exploded. He crushed his mouth down on hers, not with tenderness, but with a raw, desperate hunger that consumed them both. It wasn't a kiss. It was a surrender, a confession, A brutal, passionate collision that marked the end of their fight and the beginning of a war neither of them could hope to win. Chapter 10. The Fire of Battle. The first sound was a low, mournful howl from the northern ridge, an alarm. The second was a scream. Draven was on his feet before the sound died, his blood turning to ice and then to fire. Rogues. They were attacking the den itself, a move of suicidal foolishness, or desperate courage. He didn't care which. A primal snarl ripped from his chest as he burst from his chambers. The scent of strange, hostile wolves, mangy, bitter, and unwelcome, was a foul miasma in the air. The sounds of battle erupted around him. Shouts, snarls, the sickening, wet sound of claws meeting flesh. This was his element. In the chaos of combat, all the gnawing complexities of his life, the curse, the scent of the girl in his rooms, the ghost of his mother, it all burned away, leaving only the cold, sharp clarity of the Alpha. His wolf surged to the surface, a perfect union of instinct and strategy. He moved through the fray, a blur of deadly force. His commands were sharp, clipped roars that cut through the din, directing his warriors, shoring up defenses, exploiting every weakness in the rogue's haphazard attack. He was a king defending his castle, a predator protecting his territory. Every enemy that fell before him was a testament to his strength, a grim satisfaction that pushed back the shadows in his soul. Then he saw her, a flash of brown hair and fierce determination at the edge of the clearing. Nyra. She was running toward the fighting, not away from it, a small satchel of medical supplies clutched in her hand. A Bloodfang warrior was down, clutching a bloody leg, and she was going to him. A wave of fury and disbelief crashed through him. What was she doing? The sheer reckless bravery of it stole his breath, but his disbelief was instantly consumed by a far more powerful, far more terrifying emotion. Fear.
From her window, Nyra watched the battle unfold in horrific, chaotic flashes. Wolves and men clashed in a brutal, deadly dance. Her first instinct, the one that had kept her alive for years, screamed at her to hide, to lock the door, crawl under the bed, and wait for it to be over. This wasn't her fight. These weren't her people. But then she saw it. A young warrior, one she recognized from the mess hall, went down, his leg torn open, blood pumping onto the dark earth. No one was going to him. They were all fighting. He was going to bleed out. Her healer's soul would not allow it. It was a compulsion stronger than fear. Her mother's lessons warred with her conscience. Never get involved, stay hidden, survive. But the image of the dying boy, she couldn't ignore it. With a choked sob of frustration at her own foolishness, she grabbed the small pouch of emergency supplies she always kept and ran from the room. She sprinted toward the fallen warrior, the sounds and smells of battle overwhelming her senses. She reached his side, her hands already working, tearing strips of cloth, pressing them against the gushing wound. But her focus made her a target. A massive rogue, his face a mask of blood and dirt, saw her. An easy kill. He broke from the fighting and lunged toward her, a triumphant snarl on his lips. Nyra looked up, her eyes widening in terror. There was no time to scream, no time to run.
The world went red. Seeing that rogue lunge for Nyra, for his mate, it snapped every last thread of his control. A roar of pure, primal fury exploded from his lungs, a sound that was not human. He was no longer an alpha defending his pack. He was a male defending what was his. He crossed the clearing in 2 impossible strides, a blur of unleashed power. He intercepted the rogue midair, his claws extending, his fangs bared. The fight was not a fight. It was an execution. It was brutal, final, and absolute. He stood over the rogue's body, his chest heaving, the bloodlust slowly receding, replaced by the thrumming, possessive adrenaline of the near miss. He turned to Nyra. She was staring at him, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The adrenaline, the fear, the scent of her, the violence of the battle, it all coalesced into a single, undeniable point of need. The line between violence and passion had ceased to exist. Ignoring the remaining skirmishes, ignoring the shouts of his warriors, he swept her up into his arms. She was light, trembling. She made no sound as he carried her through the den, back toward the silent sanctuary of his chambers. He kicked the door shut behind them, the sound echoing the finality of the moment. The fire of the battle had burned away everything between them. The arguments, the fear, the resistance. All that was left was this. The raw, desperate, undeniable truth. And it was about to consume them both.
Chapter 11. The morning after the storm. Nyra woke slowly, adrift in a sea of unfamiliar sensations. The sheets against her skin were softer than anything she had ever felt. The air was thick with a scent that was uniquely his. Pine, power, and something deeply masculine that seemed to soak into her very soul. The memories of the night before came back not in a rush, but in slow, lingering waves. The desperate, hungry kisses. The feel of his skin against hers. The way he had looked at her, his golden eyes burning with a raw vulnerability she never thought him capable of. It had not been gentle. It had been a storm, a clash of two worlds, a desperate, passionate collision that had left her breathless and aching. And in the cold gray light of morning, alone in his massive bed, a single, devastating emotion washed over her. Regret. A deep, hollow ache of regret that was so profound it felt like grief. She had done the one thing her mother had spent a lifetime warning her against. She had trusted an alpha. She had not just trusted him, she had given herself to him, body and soul. She had let the monster into her heart. The thought was a shard of ice, piercing through the warm afterglow of their passion. She had to get out. Now. Before he came back. Before this one night of weakness could turn into a lifetime of being his. With a surge of frantic energy, she slid from the bed, her movements hurried and silent. She gathered her meager belongings, her hands trembling. Her goal was clear, a single bright point of light in the fog of her confusion. Escape. She would run. She would disappear. She would go back to her old life, find her mother, and forget this den, this pack, and this alpha ever existed. As she moved about the room, a strange, dizzying flicker of energy pulsed through her. She paused, pressing a hand to her stomach. It was probably just exhaustion, the after effects of his potent, overwhelming presence. But the feeling persisted over the next week, a subtle wrongness, a change. Her monthly cycle, always as regular as the moon, was late. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. She was a healer. She knew her own body. She knew the signs. With trembling hands, she used a small portion of the moonpetal she had managed to keep hidden, mixing it with other herbs from a small, neglected greenhouse she'd found near the den. It was an old healer's trick, a way to test for life. She held the small bundle of herbs in her palm and focused, pushing a tiny bit of her own energy into it. The herbs were supposed to remain inert, but they didn't. They pulsed once, with a faint, silvery light that mirrored a tiny, rhythmic beat she could suddenly feel deep within her. A second heartbeat. A new life. His life. Their life. The world tilted and went silent. Pregnant. The word was a silent scream in her mind. Terror, stark and absolute, seized her. A child would bind her to him forever. It would be a golden chain, locking her in this cage for the rest of her life. But beneath the terror, something else stirred. A fierce, primal, and completely unexpected wave of protective love for the tiny spark of life growing inside her. It was this love, this new, terrifying love that solidified her resolve. She had to escape. Not just for herself anymore, for her child. Just as she turned toward the door, her plan solidifying, it swung open. Draven stood there, his hair damp from a morning wash, his golden eyes searching hers. But there was something different in his gaze today. It wasn't anger. It wasn't passion. It was a new light, a fierce, knowing intensity that seemed to look right through her, right into the new secret she held in her womb. His wolf had already sensed it. He knew. Her escape route had just
Chapter
vanished.
12. the gilded cage. He knew. The moment he walked into the room, his wolf confirmed it. The scent of her, his beautiful, intoxicating mate, had changed. It was richer, deeper, laced with a new, life-giving sweetness. A second heartbeat, faint but insistent, called to his own. A child, his heir. An impossible, miraculous reality that sent a shockwave through his entire being. The Varick curse, the phantom voice of his deepest fear, roared to life in his mind. Loss. The word was a serpent, coiling around his heart. The agony of his mother's death was a fresh, raw wound. He would not, could not lose them too. That fear, potent and all-consuming, short-circuited all logic. His every instinct, every fiber of his alpha being reconfigured itself around a single, primal directive. Protect. Protect her. Protect their child. Lock them away from the world, from rivals, from Lyandra, from his own brother's ambition, from every conceivable danger. He saw it as the only logical course of action. It was his duty. It was the only way to keep the crushing agony of the curse at bay. Because if he kept them safe, he could not lose them. He walked toward her, his face a mask of cold resolve, hiding the storm of terror and fierce joy raging within him. "You are not to leave these chambers," he stated, his voice flat and absolute. It was not a request. It was a law. "I will have guards posted at the door. Everything you need will be brought to you. It is for your safety, for the safety of the child." He expected her to be relieved. He expected her to understand. He had not anticipated her rage.
His words were not a comfort. They were a death sentence for her freedom. The last vestiges of her hope turned to ash. He didn't see her as a partner, as the mother of his child. He saw her as a vessel, a precious object to be locked away and guarded. A fierce, hot fury born of terror and a shattered heart erupted inside her. "My safety," she cried, her voice trembling with rage. "Or your control. You want to cage me. You want to cage this child. We are not your possessions, Draven." She shoved at his chest, her palms flat against the wall of his muscle. "I will not be your prisoner." "You do not understand the dangers," he growled, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders, his golden eyes blazing with an intensity that was part protectiveness, part madness. "I will not lose you." Desperate to make her see, to make her understand the gravity of the situation, he called for Alara. The old healer came, her eyes wide and questioning. "Confirm it," Draven commanded. "Confirm the pregnancy is healthy." Nyra stood rigidly as Alara placed a gentle, wrinkled hand on her still flat stomach. The old woman closed her eyes, her own senses probing the new life within. A moment of silence. Then another. Alara's eyes snapped open, her face pale with shock. "Alpha!" The healer's voice was a choked whisper. She took a stumbling step back, her gaze darting between Nyra and Draven with a mixture of awe and profound fear. "The pregnancy, it's progressing far too quickly. The power I feel, it's immense. I've never felt anything like it." Alara looked at Draven, her eyes filled with a terrifying reverence. "By the great moon. It's a lunar alpha. It carries both of your bloodlines, the strength of an alpha, and the hidden power of a shadow wolf." The words dropped into the silent room like a boulder, shattering their personal conflict into 1,000 pieces. This was no longer about them. A lunar alpha, a legend, a prophecy. Their child wasn't just an heir. It was a political firestorm waiting to happen. The entire werewolf world would hunt for a child with that kind of power. Draven's gilded cage had just become a necessity, and Nyra's world had just become infinitely more dangerous. Hari Chapter 13. An Offer in the Shadows. In the silent, suffocating aftermath of the lunar alpha revelation, the den transformed. The pack members no longer looked at Nyra with simple suspicion. Their gazes were now heavy with a disturbing mixture of awe and fear. She was no longer just the alpha's strange pet. She was a living prophecy, a vessel for a miracle. and it was infinitely worse. Draven's protection, which had once been a possessive arm around her, had now become an iron fortress. Guards stood at her door day and night. The world had shrunk to the four walls of her opulent room. She was a treasure locked in a vault, and she had never felt more trapped in her life. This new reality was a slow-acting poison, leaving her desperate for any kind of escape. That was when Lucian came. Not through the door, but through the window. One moment she was staring out at the moonlit courtyard. The next he was vaulting silently over the stone balustrade, landing with the noiseless grace of a cat. He bypassed Draven's guards completely, a feat of stealth and daring that sent a thrill of fear and admiration through her. He pressed a finger to his lips, his eyes sparkling with a dangerous light. "I told you I would help you," he whispered, his voice a low, intimate murmur in the quiet room. "And I always keep my promises." He began to speak, his words weaving a story that captivated her against her will. He told her about Draven before the throne, before the ice had fully encased his heart. He spoke of two young brothers, of a mother with a warm laugh, of a time when Draven's golden eyes held light instead of shadows. He told her how their mother, a gifted healer like Nyra's own, had been poisoned by a rival pack. But it wasn't just the poison that killed her. It was the despair. "There is a sickness in our bloodline, Nyra," Lucian confessed, his voice laced with an old pain. "A curse that turns grief into a soul-eating monster. It devoured our father after she died. And it almost took Draven, too. The coldness, you see? The control? That is the cage he built around the monster inside him." His story humanized the beast she thought she knew, and that made her choice impossibly harder. He then took her hand, his touch gentle, a stark contrast to Draven's possessive grip. "The promise I made to your mother. It was because she helped mine in her final days. My mother saw the goodness in her, the same goodness I see in you, and I swore I would not let her daughter suffer the same fate, trapped by the ambitions of a broken man." He leaned closer, his gaze intense and sincere. "Draven will never let you or that child be free. He sees you as a cure for his own pain. I see you as a person who deserves a choice. I can get you out of here. I can take you somewhere safe where the council can't find you, where you can raise your child in peace. With me." Building on that staggering offer, he did something she never expected. He leaned in and kissed her. It was nothing like Draven's kiss. There was no fire, no brutal claiming. It was a kiss of breathtaking tenderness, a soft, questioning pressure that spoke of reverence and a quiet promise. It was a gentle touch in a world of violence. It was a whisper of a different kind of life, a different kind of man, a life of freedom, a life of peace. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers, not for an answer, but for understanding. The seed of his offer was planted, a dangerous, beautiful flower in the barren wasteland of her captivity. He vanished back into the night as silently as he had come, leaving her with an impossible choice: the gilded cage with the broken monster, or the uncertain freedom with the gentle prince. Her child's future depended on her answer.
Chapter 14. The Council's Shadow. The message arrived on the wings of a trained raven, its black claws clutching a scroll sealed with the stark, silver sigil of the Alpha Council. Draven broke the seal with a sense of grim foreboding. The script inside was archaic, the words elegant and utterly uncompromising. They knew. Rumors of a new power, of a fated mating, of a child of prophecy had reached the ancient ears of the ruling body. The council wasn't asking. They were demanding. The child upon its birth was to be surrendered to their care, for its own protection, for the future of their kind. The scroll was a declaration of war, a direct challenge to his authority, to his right as a father, to his claim as an alpha. From this new, terrifying precipice, his world narrowed to a single point of fury. They would take his child. They would take a piece of her, the only light that had pierced his darkness in years. The thought of their faceless political hands on his son or daughter sent a wave of murderous rage through him, so potent it made the very stones of his den seem to tremble. He was the alpha of the Bloodfang. His pack was his own. His mate was his own. His child was his own. He would burn the world to the ground before he let them take what was his, because he knew their protection was just another word for possession, a way to control a power they feared. His enemies were no longer just scattered bands of rogues. They were the very foundation of his world. He was utterly, completely alone in this fight. He couldn't show weakness to his pack. He couldn't show defiance to the council without inviting a war he wasn't sure he could win. The walls were closing in, the pressure building, squeezing the air from his lungs. He felt trapped, caged, exactly as he had caged her. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. In the grip of this new desperation, he found himself outside her chambers. He had to make her understand. He had to tear down the final wall between them, because without her, he would be consumed by the fight to come. He walked in without knocking. She was standing by the window, a solitary, beautiful figure outlined against the moon. He saw the flash of fear in her eyes, quickly masked by her usual defiance. But he didn't have the strength for another fight. Not tonight. "They want the child," he said, his voice raw, stripped of all its usual authority. "The Alpha Council. They know about the prophecy. They want to take him, or her." He saw the color drain from her face. He took a step closer, then another, his need to close the distance between them overwhelming. "You think I am a monster, Nyra. You think I am a tyrant for wanting to keep you safe. And you are not wrong." He stopped a few feet from her, the admission costing him a piece of his soul. "But you don't know why. You don't know about the Varick curse." He finally said the name aloud to her, the sound of it a poison. He told her everything. He spoke of his mother's death, not as a simple fact, but as a living nightmare. He described how the curse had taken his grief and twisted it into a physical, soul-shredding madness. A madness that made him claw at his own skin, that made him howl until his throat was raw, that made him crave the final piece of his own death. "My father gave in to it," he whispered, the memory a ghost in his eyes. "It consumed him, and it almost consumed me. The only thing that stopped it was ice. I buried my heart in it. I built a fortress of control, of logic, of ruthlessness, because it was the only way to keep the monster chained." His voice broke, a sound of such profound, shattering vulnerability that it seemed to echo in the silent room. He finally looked at her, his golden eyes stripped bare, filled with a terror she had never seen. "That monster is still inside me, Nyra, and it screams for you. It screams for our child. My fear, my control, my possessiveness. It's not about owning you." He took the final step, his voice dropping to a choked whisper. "It's about my terror of what the grief of losing you would turn me into." The confession lay between them, a raw, bleeding wound. He had given her the final piece of his broken soul, the key to his madness. Their personal war was over, replaced by a new terrifying truth. They were no longer just captor and captive. They were two souls bound together, facing a world that would stop at nothing to tear them, and their unborn child, apart.
Chapter 15. A Ghost's Message. In the wake of Draven's raw, soul-bearing confession, a fragile and unnerving peace settled between them. He was still a monster, still her captor, but now she had seen the broken man inside the beast. He gave her space, his golden eyes watching her from a distance, filled with a new, terrifying vulnerability. They were no longer just jailer and prisoner. They were unwilling allies, bound by the secret of their child and the looming threat of the Alpha Council. Her anger had cooled, leaving behind a confusing, murky sea of sympathy and resentment. She was beginning to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, her mother had been wrong about all alphas. This fragile truce was shattered by the arrival of a messenger, not a raven bearing the council's seal, but a captured rogue, bleeding and defiant, dragged into the main hall. He carried no scroll, only a verbal message, and he would give it to no one but the rogue healer. Draven's jaw tightened, but he allowed it. Nyra was brought before the captive, her heart hammering with a sudden, inexplicable dread. The rogue's eyes, filled with a fanatic's fire, locked onto hers. "A message," he rasped, a bloody smile splitting his lips. "From my Alpha. He says he has something of yours, a little bird he's kept safe in a cage for years. He says you should come and get her." To punctuate his words, he spat something small and metallic onto the stone floor. It was a locket, a simple silver locket, tarnished with age, with a tiny, faded engraving of a moonpetal flower. Her mother's locket, the one Nyra believed had been lost forever. The world tilted, a wave of nausea and disbelief washing over her. Her mother. Alive? After all this time. Alive and a prisoner? Following this stunning revelation, a panicked, irrational rage consumed her. She spun on Draven, her voice a choked, accusing cry. "You knew, you must have known. Your patrols sweep these lands for leagues. How could you not know he had her?" Before Draven could answer, before he could process the accusation in her eyes, Lucian was there. He appeared at her side as if from the shadows, his expression a perfect mask of grave concern. He gently steered her away from the commotion, his voice a low, urgent whisper in her ear. "Nyra, you must calm down. Think. Does it not seem strange that this rogue Alpha, the one who has hunted you for years, suddenly reveals he has your mother now? Just when Draven has you and the child?" He let the question sink in before delivering the final, poisonous blow. His voice dropped even lower, filled with a terrible, feigned reluctance. "There is something I never told you. Years ago, after my mother was poisoned, Draven was half mad with the curse. He hunted for your mother. He believed she, a powerful rogue healer, might have been involved. He never found her, but what if he did, recently? What if he made a deal with that rogue Alpha? Let him keep your mother as leverage and as a chain to ensure you would never leave him." It was a lie, crafted with a surgeon's precision, designed to slice through the fragile trust she had just begun to build. It preyed on every fear, every warning, every doubt she had ever had. From that moment forward, everything changed. She looked at Draven, who was now striding toward her, his face a mask of confusion and concern. But she no longer saw the broken man who had confessed his soul to her. She saw the ruthless, manipulative Alpha she had first met, a monster capable of caging her mother just to keep her. And in that instant, her heart, which had just begun to soften, shattered into a million pieces of ice. Chapter 16. The Flight to Ruin. Lucian's poisonous words had taken root in the ruins of her heart. The man she was beginning to trust, the father of her child, was now the architect of her mother's suffering. It was the only explanation that made sense of the madness. His confession of the curse wasn't a plea for understanding. It was a confession of his own monstrous selfishness. He would do anything to avoid his own pain, even bargain away her mother's life. Lucian's offer of escape was no longer a choice between two paths. It was the only path, the only way to save her mother, the only way to protect her child from a man who would use anyone, betray anyone, to serve his own needs. That night, she made her choice. Fueled by a desperate, grief-stricken resolve, she met Lucian at the window as he'd instructed. He was her savior now, her only hope. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered, his eyes filled with a deep, convincing sympathy. She simply nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Trusting him, another Alpha, felt like a betrayal of her very soul. But what choice did she have? She was choosing the lesser of two evils. She had to believe that. The escape was a blur of shadows and silence. Lucian knew the den's secret ways, the blind spots in the patrols, the hidden path that led beyond the fortress walls. As she took one last look back at the stone monolith that had been her prison, a profound sense of loss washed over her. She was leaving behind the father of her child, the man whose soul she had glimpsed, however briefly. The irony was a bitter pill. She was running with an alpha to escape an alpha, all because of the warnings her mother had given her. And now, that same mother was a pawn in their deadly game.
He found the room empty. The silence was a living thing, a malevolent presence that mocked him. The window, open to the cold night air, was a gaping wound. Her scent was faint, fading, and it was tangled with the triumphant, treacherous scent of his own brother, Lucienne. She was gone. She had taken their child. She had listened to his confession, looked into the deepest, most broken part of him, and she had still chosen to leave. With him, the betrayal was absolute. It was a physical force, a blow that shattered the fragile ice around his heart and unleashed the monster he had kept chained for so long. The Veyric curse did not whisper this time. It roared. It was a tidal wave of pure, undiluted agony that drowned him. Loss, betrayal, failure. The feelings were a white-hot fire, burning away every last shred of his control, his logic, his very identity. He was no longer Draven, Alpha of the Bloodfang. He was a gaping wound, a being of pure pain and incandescent rage. A sound tore from his throat, a howl of such bottomless despair and fury that it shook the den to its foundations. It was the sound of a soul breaking. He had lost everything. Again. But this time, the grief was not a thing of sadness. It was a weapon. He stormed from the chambers, his warriors stumbling back from the raw, untamed power radiating from him. His golden eyes were no longer human. They were the eyes of the beast unleashed and hungry for destruction. He would find a war. He would find an enemy. He would unleash this storm of pain on the world until there was nothing left, not even himself. The all-is-lost moment was complete. He had lost his mate, his child, and now he was losing his mind.
Chapter 17. The Jaws of the Trap. In the tense quiet of the forest, the initial relief of escape had curdled into a tight knot of anxiety in Nyra's stomach. They had been traveling for hours, Lucian's confident reassurances the only thing keeping her moving forward. "We're almost there, Nyra," he'd whispered, pointing toward a ridge in the distance. "My contacts are just beyond that rise. They'll keep you safe until we can find your mother." She clung to his words, a drowning woman clutching at a piece of driftwood. She had to believe him. She had sacrificed everything for this chance. The forest had grown unnervingly silent. The air was still, heavy, holding its breath. It was the calm at the center of a storm, and they had just walked right into it. The ambush was not a chaotic rush. It was a precise, tactical maneuver. Shadows detached themselves from the trees, silent figures forming a closing circle around them. It was a trap, perfectly planned, perfectly executed. Lucian swore, shoving her behind him as he shifted, the sound of his transformation a violent crack in the silence. He fought with the desperate courage of a cornered wolf, a blur of black fur and flashing claws. But he was one against a dozen, and they were good. They moved together with a pack synergy that spoke of long, hard training. They harried him, flanked him, wore him down. He went down with a choked cry of pain, a silver-tipped arrow buried deep in his shoulder. He shifted back, gasping, helpless on the forest floor. From the deepest shadows, a new figure emerged. He was tall and lean, with an air of cruel, calculating intelligence that was far more terrifying than any brute force. It was the rogue Alpha, the man from her nightmares. He stepped over Lucian's prone body as if he were nothing more than a log, his cold eyes fixing on Nyra. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. "Hello, little bird," he purred, his voice a silken threat. He gestured toward the wounded, groaning Lucian. "I must thank my associate for bringing you to me. So much less effort." The world dissolved into a roar of static in Nyra's ears. Associate. The word was a death knell. The truth crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. Lucian hadn't been manipulated. He hadn't been a pawn. He had been a willing participant. He had led her here. He had delivered her to her greatest enemy. Every kind word, every promise, every gentle touch had been a lie, a calculated betrayal. She had trusted the smiling serpent over the broken monster, and her mistake was going to cost her everything. Hands grabbed her, rough and merciless, dragging her forward. She was captured. Her child was in mortal danger, and the only person in the world who would burn it all down to save her was the man she had just abandoned to his demons. Utter, complete despair washed over her. This was it. This was the bottom. There was no hope left.
Chapter 18. A Man Reborn. The world was red. Red mist, red rage, red blood. Draven moved through the territory of a rival pack not as an alpha, but as a hurricane. His claws were stained, his fur matted with the blood of his enemies. He fought without thought, without strategy, fueled only by the howling, empty agony of the Varric curse. He had lost her. She had chosen his brother. The pain was a physical thing, a storm of phantom claws shredding him from the inside out, and the only way to silence it was with violence. He threw another wolf aside, a feral snarl ripping from his throat. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. In the midst of the chaos, a familiar scent cut through the stench of blood. A scout from his own pack, his eyes wide with terror at the sight of his berserker Alpha. "Alpha!" the young wolf panted, skidding to a halt. "A message! Kyle, the warrior she saved. He followed Lucian's trail. It was a trap." The words barely registered through the red haze. Draven lunged, ready to tear this interruption apart. "The rogue Alpha! He has her!" the scout screamed, shutting his eyes, bracing for death. He has her. The words were a bucket of ice water to his soul. The red mist of the curse's rage didn't just recede. It evaporated, burned away by a new, hotter fire. A singular, clarifying thought pierced the madness. Nyra. She wasn't gone because she had betrayed him. She was gone because she had been taken. The directionless, self-destructive fury vanished, instantly reforged into a spear of cold, lethal purpose. The rage was still there, a white-hot core inside him, but it was no longer his master. It was his weapon. He was no longer a man lost to grief. He was an alpha with a mission. His love for her, the terrifying, consuming fear of her being harmed, was a force far greater than the curse's despair. It was an anchor in the storm. He turned away from the cowering rival wolves, leaving the meaningless battle behind without a second glance. His golden eyes, moments before lost to madness, were now sharp and clear with a terrifying resolve. He had one purpose, one goal: bring her home. He broke into a dead run, his paws eating up the ground, every muscle, every fiber of his being focused on a single name that echoed in his soul. Nyra.
Chapter 19. The quiet before the storm. Nyra sat on the cold, damp floor of her cell, the scent of stale air and her enemy's musk a suffocating blanket. The initial shock had worn off, the despair hardening into a cold, sharp point of anger. She had been a fool. She had trusted Lucien's gentle lies over Draven's broken truths, but her regret was a luxury she couldn't afford. She pressed a hand to her stomach, where the tiny, secret life within her pulsed with a faint, insistent energy. Fear for her child was a fire in her veins, burning away her helplessness. A new strength, fierce and unfamiliar, awoke in her blood. The dormant power of her shadow wolf lineage stirred. She was not just a victim. She was a mother, and she would fight for her child until her last breath. Draven stormed back into his den, not as a raging beast, but as a king returning to his war room. The change in him was absolute, his presence a palpable force of controlled power that made his warriors snap to attention. He was no longer spiraling. He was focused. He gathered his 5 most elite warriors, the ones who had fought beside him for years. "Lucien betrayed us," he stated, his voice devoid of all emotion. "He delivered Nyra to the rogue Alpha. We are going to get her back." He laid out a map on the stone table. He knew they would be outnumbered. A frontal assault would be suicide, and would put Nyra in even greater danger. This had to be a rescue, not a war. His plan was not one of brute force. It was a masterpiece of infiltration and surgical strikes designed with a single overriding objective: get Nyra and the child out, alive and unharmed. His love had not made him reckless. It had made him brilliant. As he and his warriors moved out, cloaked in the deep shadows of the twilight forest, they approached the borders of the rogue's territory. The foul scent of his enemy was strong on the wind. But beneath it, ever so faintly, he caught another scent. Night flowers and lightning. Her. His control was a steel cage around the snarling beast in his chest, but the rage was there, a coiled serpent ready to strike. The final battle was near.
Chapter 20. The approach. The assault began in silence. There was no battle cry, no furious charge. Draven and his warriors moved like specters through the twisted thorny woods that guarded the rogue's den. This was a hunt. Every warrior knew their role. 2 moved to the east, 2 to the west, creating diversions, drawing sentries away from the main encampment. Draven moved straight ahead, a shadow among shadows, his senses alive, mapping every sound, every scent. He dispatched a lone guard with a single silent slash of his claws. The wolf's surprised yelp choked off before it could begin. He was an instrument of pure, focused lethality. This was different from every battle he had ever fought. He wasn't fighting for land or for dominance or even for revenge. He was fighting for a future he hadn't known he wanted until it was stolen from him. He was a mate fighting for his other half, a father fighting for his unborn child. The thought gave him a clarity he had never known, a strength that was clean and sharp, unburdened by the curse's madness. He breached the outer palisade, his warriors converging behind him, a silent, deadly force. The fighting became open now, a swirling chaos of fur and fangs in the moonlight. Draven was at the center of it, a whirlwind of destruction, his every move precise, his every blow fatal. He fought his way through the den, a singular purpose driving him toward the main chamber, toward her. He kicked down the heavy wooden door, splintering it from its hinges, and the world stopped. There she was. Nyra. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed with a defiant fire that made his heart ache. She was being held tightly by the rogue Alpha, a long, gleaming silver blade pressed against the delicate skin of her throat. The sight of that blade, so close to her, so close to his child, shattered the cold, tactical control he had maintained. The coiled serpent of his rage exploded, the beast roared, and this time he let it. The final confrontation had begun.
Chapter 21. A Bond of Blood and Soul. The standoff was a frozen moment in time. Draven faced the rogue Alpha, Silas, across the stone chamber. Silas's arm was a vice around Nyra's chest, the silver blade at her throat a cruel, gleaming smile in the torchlight. And so the great Bloodfang Alpha comes to heel, Silas purred, his voice slick with triumph. All for a stray rogue. The Varick curse has made you weak, Draven. It rots your bloodline. Once I have your child, I will have that power without the weakness. Draven's rage was a physical force, a storm held back by a single fragile thread of control. One wrong move, and that blade would slice through Nyra's skin. He had to think. He had to plan. But his tactical mind was being drowned out by the primal roar of his wolf. Our mate, our pup. Kill him. Kill him. Then, Silas shifted his grip, the blade pressing just a fraction deeper, a single perfect crimson bead welling up on Nyra's throat. And in that instant, Draven knew there was no plan, there was no strategy, there was only her. In a flash of movement, he didn't lunge at Silas. He lunged between them, a blur of fur and fury, shielding her with his own body. Silas's blade, meant for Nyra's heart, plunged deep into Draven's side. The silver was a searing, white-hot agony, a fire that tore through him. He crashed to the floor, his strength vanishing, his vision tunneling. He looked up at Nyra, at her face, her beautiful, terrified face, and he felt peace. The curse's shriek of loss was silent, defeated by something stronger. He had chosen her life over his. He smiled, a bloody final gesture. "I'd rather die with you," he choked out, "than live without you." Nyra watched him fall, his words a key turning a lock deep inside her soul. The sight of his lifeblood, dark and precious, spilling onto the cold stone. It broke something. It unleashed something. A power she never knew she possessed erupted from the core of her being. It was not hot like a wolf's rage. It was cold. A silent, swirling vortex of shadow and moonlight. Her shadow wolf had awakened. Silas stared, his eyes wide with shock at this new, terrifying power. But Nyra ignored him. She dropped to her knees beside Draven, pressing her hand against his grievous wound. Driven by an instinct older than memory, she let her own blood from a self-inflicted cut on her palm mingle with his. "Mine," the ancient power whispered in her mind. "He is mine. We are one." A blood binding, a merging of fates. A torrent of her shadowy lunar energy poured into him, not just healing but rewriting his very essence. The Veyric curse shattered like glass against the force of their unified souls. The backlash of power threw Silas back against the wall, stunned and helpless, as Draven's warriors finally swarmed him. Draven's eyes fluttered open, his golden gaze finding hers, no longer haunted, but filled with a pure, unadulterated love. Their bond was now eternal. Chapter 22. Ashes and Alliances. In the aftermath of the battle, the den was a place of controlled chaos. Warriors tended to their wounded, their movements weary but their spirits high. At the center of it all was Draven, weak but alive, with Nyra by his side. The wound in his side, which should have been fatal, was now nothing more than a thin silver scar, a testament to the new, unbreakable bond that pulsed between them. He was different. The icy wall around his heart had melted, replaced by a warm, steady light of love that he directed entirely at her. The traitors were brought forward. Silas, the rogue Alpha, was chained and defiant, but the true reckoning was for Lucian. Draven faced his half-brother not with the rage of the curse, but with the cold, quiet sorrow of a broken heart. "You are no longer my brother," Draven stated, his voice final. "You are no longer of this pack. You are exiled. If I ever see your face again, I will kill you myself." He was stripped of his rank and cast out into the wilderness. It was then that Silas, in a final spiteful act, revealed the last piece of the puzzle. "He wasn't the only one," the rogue sneered, nodding toward a stunned Leandra being held by the guards. "She promised me his throne, if I could just get rid of the little stray." Leandra's beautiful face contorted in a mask of fury and denial, but the evidence was undeniable. She too was exiled, her ambition having led her to utter ruin. As the den began to find its new rhythm, Lucian paused at the edge of the forest. He turned, his gaze not on Draven, but on Nyra. "The council will still come for that child," he warned, his voice carrying on the wind. "And the Veyric blood may be quiet now, but the instinct to control remains. If you ever forget what you almost lost today, Draven, if your protection ever becomes a cage again." He looked back at Nyra. "I will find a way to take her from you myself." The words were not just a threat, but a strange, unsettling promise, a loose thread left dangling in their hard-won peace.
Chapter 23. A New Dawn. 9 months later, the den was a different world. The grim stone fortress had become a home, filled not just with the sounds of training, but with the laughter of children. Draven's leadership, now tempered by Nyra's compassion and wisdom, had ushered in an era of unprecedented peace and strength. The pack was thriving, healed from the inside out. One warm afternoon, Nyra sat with Draven on a sun-drenched balcony overlooking the territory, their son cradled in her arms. He was a beautiful baby with her soft brown hair and his father's startling, intelligent golden eyes. Draven, the once feared Bloodfang Alpha, traced a gentle finger down his son's cheek, his touch filled with a reverence and tenderness that still made Nyra's heart ache with love. He leaned over and pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "I never knew peace until you," he murmured against her skin. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You were a monster," she whispered back playfully. "I was," he agreed without hesitation, "and you saved me from him." They had found their place. Their love had not just healed them, it had redeemed them. It had transformed them. The broken Alpha had learned to love without destroying, and the cautious rogue had learned to trust, finding her power not in hiding, but in binding her soul to another. They were whole. They were home. The happy ending they had fought so hard for was finally real. A quiet, simple peace that was more precious than any throne or territory.
At the height of the winter solstice celebration, the Great Hall was filled with light and laughter. Draven and Nyra stood together, their son, now a thriving infant, babbling happily in his father's strong arms. From across the crowded room, a solitary figure watched them, Lucian. He had been granted a temporary reprieve for the festival, a lone shadow in the joyous crowd. As if feeling his gaze, the baby turned his head. The infant's golden eyes, so like his father's, but holding a different ancient light, locked with Lucian's. In that instant, Lucian felt a shockwave of pure, undeniable power wash over him. It was not a request or a threat. It was a command. An instinct older than blood, deeper than loyalty, took root in his soul, and he found himself dropping to one knee, his head bowed. Not to his brother, the Alpha, but to the child. He looked up, shaken to his very core, and met Draven's confused gaze. A slow, chilling smile touched Lucian's lips. He had seen the future. "He's not going to answer to you, Draven," Lucian said, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a prophecy. "He's going to answer to himself."